Am I recording? Okay, it's going now.
Hooray.
Hooray. Okay, so, hello, I'm Kurt Zarniko. Yes. And I'm an independent scholar with a permanent seat. Yes. In the School of Arts and Media in the University of Salford. And today I'm joined, as if I have other days. This is the only day we are together here, Joe and I.
Hi.
This is Joe Scott.
Hello, so I'm Joe. I'm a lecturer in performance in the School of Arts and Media, so I'm one of Kurt's colleagues. I'm not sure that I have a permanent seat, as he does, but I am a lecturer here and I teach in theatre and performance and mostly contemporary performance practice and study.
So it's lovely to be with you here, Joe, in this situation.
You too, Kurt.
I'm sort of fantasizing that I've got this regular vodcast show in which I invite guests to come and elucidate aspects of the discipline, the work we do, the world we inhabit academically, anything really, elucidate from my small brain those parts which are foggy and dark. So Andy Mia, Maya Mia, Mamma Mia!
Here we go again.
Yeah, brilliant, Joe, playing along. It's brilliant. She's spontaneous, and we are spontaneous, unscripted discussion, as requested by Andy Mia, an introduction to some of the key ideas in performance that we are grappling with in performance, or thinking about in performance. So we're not going to really look at you much anymore. We're just going to chat together, because it's hard to split our focus. And we're going to just ruminate a little bit. Now, poor Joe, has not had very much advanced information.
None.
So we are none, let's say none. So I thought a nice way would really be to look at what we are sharing with our own students in terms of introductory concepts and key terms.
Yeah.
And if we get lost, that's because when we write the PowerPoints and Prezi, I say we, I don't do any of that.
No.
When we read the chapters and when we discuss them with our students, we have these things to hand. We rarely have to just spontaneously, define. That's so hard. And also counterintuitive, as you will see. We picked this up, by the way. Can you hold that there, Joe? I'll see if you can see it. I'm looking and looking at it. I'm looking and looking through the lens and looking at. You can probably just see that. Yeah, they can see that. This says ambiguity and ambivalence. And this was picked up from a lecture on postmodernism presented to second year performance students. And they are all studying postmodernism, which now it turns out is rather a quaint idea, quaint world.
Oh, that lovely old postmodernist world. Eh?
It was safe in those days. You knew where you didn't stand.
Exactly. You didn't know where you did stand, or you did know where you didn't stand.
You never had to commit yourself to any kind of standpoint.
No, you could just move freely between different kinds of areas. And it didn't really matter whether you believed in something or not.
Exactly so. You did not have to really commit yourself in that sense.
Indeed, it was not de rigueur, I would say, to commit oneself to a particular kind of idea or stake a claim or put a flag in the ground.
Yeah, and this sort of encourages a sort of laissez-faire attitude to the meaning or the message, because this was abandoned, I guess, after modernism.
Yeah.
The idea of these grand narratives, and this is my lecture now to the second year performance students. Yeah, but I'm not sure what your knowledge is in relation to performance, so you forgive us if we're just giving you the cow's milk.
Oh yeah, the cow's milk.
Yeah, this is what they give to the baby. So if you prefer like the goat's milk, or
Sheep's?
Sheep or soya milk.
Soya.
Yeah, that would be quite coconut these days. Then, please forgive us, we are just assuming that you need the cow's milk to begin with. So, we teach this postmodern as now a quaint era almost, although, would you say it has a beginning or a...
No, I mean, I think that a lot of the kind of practices in performance that we reference as postmodern, I would say, are 80s, 90s, noughties.
Yeah.
So they sit within that kind of era. And I think before that, I think we think of much more kind of a very different set of practices, particularly in the US, North America, and the kind of post-war era when there was the emergence of performance and performance art. And actually the notion of performance, I suppose, we think of in that era in the 60s and the 70s, and a lot more kind of, I suppose you could call them committed types of acts of performance, which don't really fit with that notion of postmodernism that we were discussing.
Why is that?
Well, I think that from my perspective, a lot of those kind of tropes that we attach to postmodernism, which are to do with, kind of eradicating grand narratives, making ambivalence something that is a quality that we kind of engage with, not really kind of committing to a particular form, style or intention, but really playfully dealing with signs within a practice. I don't think you can really attach that to practitioners such as Marina Abramović, who are doing very singular, distinct, clear, politicised acts with the body that don't seem to me to fit with that kind of narrative about postmodernism. So for me, as somebody who thinks about mainly performance practice, I associate those kind of things that we've just discussed, those qualities, with a later set of practices, kind of 80s, 90s, noughties, I think.
One might also say that for a lot of practitioners, it was a question of moving away from the literary text as the founding processual item in making theatre, or making a kind of presentation to an audience involving the body in a dramatic narrative. So many people informed by devising processes and one could say European or American dance-related processes of making theatre that were not so literary. You know, we have the greatest poet in the world, they say. When they talk about Shakespeare, the rest of the world, they say he is from England, and so this explains why the literature dominates so much here. So many performers, and I'm talking mainly from somebody who has been watching performers and curious about the practice, I suppose, as opposed to these movements and histories and concepts. The performers wanted more autonomy from the text, and maybe in some cases didn't even know what they would call their own text. And so they begin to find new ways to define the way they would navigate through a piece of work and navigate through their own memory in rehearsing that piece of work. So in the 90s, yes, that whole postmodern, 80s, 90s, that whole postmodern approach to performance was an attempt also amongst practitioners to move away from taking as your first starting point the dramatic text. Yes.
I suppose even though, but then a very classic kind of postmodern group of that time, the Worcester group, are dealing with classic texts, but they are deconstructing them and they're pulling them apart and they're interrogating all sorts of elements of them. So there's also kind of a movement where text is classical kind of text that would have dominated the kind of form and meaning of the piece, I suppose, in terms of being that kind of, as you say, underpinning and not just starting point, but real framework for everything, start to be kind of pulled apart and rebuilt, I suppose, as well.
And that required a production process in which all those other people participating in the process understood the possibilities of not mapping out by looking at what's going to happen in what scene and when. So it was no longer a case of the lighting designer coming in later in the process and just lighting what you made, but of being there from the beginning and being a member of the Wooster group,
Yeah.
or the person who produces the video extracts being a member of the group. But now we are at a point where the postmodern is post, and we have to think of different ways of defining the way we want to think of performance now. So we are going to turn now to Andy Lavender. He is a key guide, let's say, for what we are teaching, working what you are working with your MA students in the Contemporary Performance Practice MA.
Yes.
And he provides a very interesting way of regarding the postmodern and looking towards other theatres, other notions of performance, or tracing performance and its place within society and culture as it moves away from the literary and is embraced within wider society, embedded in society is his term, I think. So this is not a memory test, what do we remember from the chapter, but we're going to bring out a few key words, yeah? Shall we just do that? Yeah. Post that. So I've got the chapter here, and we're going to have a look at. He breaks it down.
He does.
Here we go. Theatres of engagement.
That's a really good kind of first on the third paragraph. I think he really sets out his argument about what he thinks has changed about
in the introduction part.
In the introduction,
So if you want to look this up, we will provide a link for you. Maybe we can post it on the bottom of this page, but that might be beyond us. But the book is Performance in the 21st Century by Andy Lavender.
And then a little bit further down, perhaps. I think it's here. Actually, I've got the quote here. So,
would you mind to read it out?
So this is specifically relates to what Kurt was talking about in relation to how performance might have moved beyond the postmodern. So Lavender says, and this is a quote from him, Ip's argument, and when he says he's talking about the whole book, is that subsequent to the classic postmodern tropes of detachment, irony and contingency, many theatre and performance events in the 21st century entail altered modes of engagement on the part of both practitioners and spectators. They connect more overtly with social process. They involve a pronounced form of personal experience, often implicating the body, and sometimes even one's sense of self, and they entail certain sorts of commitment.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because the place of the body there, you would think that now we have entered the digital, where so many people have access to digital equipment, technologies, and media, that we would somehow diffuse, and the body would become less tangible in this space. But that's not really what he's saying. And somehow he's saying that the body is actually more foregrounded in this environment. Is that have I understood that?
I think so, and I think what he argues, that to some extent I do agree with really, is that because of the wealth of ubiquitous computing and modes of engagement that are not to do with co-present bodies, there is perhaps a need or a heightened need for performance to provide encounters that do allow those things to happen in a kind of a framework which I think he kind of conceives of as being primarily about a kind of engagement. That's his key term. So somehow we are committing to being in this space with this person in this framework that the performance creates, and we have to commit something of ourselves in doing that. And so we, through doing that, create a more intense and more memorable experience, perhaps. And that is about the body, isn't it? Do you think so?
I think so. The body as it is represented, let's say, within that screen space or audio space, So again, it becomes theatricalized in a strange way.
Yeah.
So we're not all theatre and performance. The two terms begin to overlap. Whereas performance was perhaps initially conceived by those who wanted to step aside from the theatre space. Performance was conceived perhaps as something cultural that might involve ritual or sports events or a wide range of different contexts for performance, social interaction and so on. Symbolic interaction in particular in terms of sociology. Now there is a way of perhaps considering these interactions and presentations across media as still full of the same illusions and ambiguities that have perhaps always already been an aspect of the problem of presenting self and body. So one commits oneself, but at the same time one commits oneself to a question with the audience. And that's what he is saying. He interestingly moves to specific zones, though, doesn't he? He kind of ends up looking at museums and sports events. I'm trying to recall where else he looks.
He looks at YouTube specifically as well.
That in particular, he's me singing. He talks about the individuals having a go, who are not considering themselves as performers. Is there anything you want to say about that?
I haven't actually read that chapter, to be honest, so I can't really comment on what he says. But what I would say, I suppose, in relation to that is that that kind of platform of YouTube has by its nature, kind of from that has arisen a set of practices that would not have existed without that platform, which I think is really interesting. So they're types of performance work that may not be conceived of, as you say, specifically as kind of a performance that you're giving, but have all the elements that we would consider in relation to making performance to do with character and persona, taking on some kinds of behaviours that are recognisable through these videos. There is setting and scenography through the way in which the videos are kind of filmed, but also what's within the frame and how that is. And then there is also this kind of sense of narrative or development of something through the course of vloggers. So I think vlogging specifically is what I'm kind of talking about, really, is that two-camera kind of practice of somehow kind of bringing sets of aspects of your life into a kind of a more much wider environment, and the kind of explosion of that very kind of everyday, as Schechner might have thought about it, type of performance, and then how it's also shifted into something that has gone beyond the extra, it's gone beyond the daily, I suppose, into something that has become something in and of itself, which is a mode of performance that I would put outside that now. Because it has its own features, it has its own kind of conventions.
And codes,
codes that are associated with that type of way of making performance.
What's marvellous about that is that those conventions appear to have been generated by people who might otherwise be considered to be amateur. So this distinction between the disciplined performer, the trained performer, and the disciplines of trying to produce this special environment and the qualities of that previously hallowed ritual space also adhere to in some sense, but in this society of amateurs.
And I think that's really interesting, because I think that contemporary performance now is becoming much more interested in untrained bodies, amateur performance, in terms of like the things that would have been kind of sniffed at. People are interested in now, they're interested in what amateur theatre groups do. They're interested in people who are not trained performers, what they do and how they manifest in performance kind of environments. And that's so different from your kind of like Grotowski, who was a kind of a very laboratory-based, disciplined kind of practitioner who believed in this very, very fierce training of the performer in order to manifest in performance in very particular kind of ways. It's just completely different interests, isn't it?
Yes. And I'm really interested in that. I'm wearing this red nose not because I consider myself to be a clown. People might look at the nose and say, there's a clown. But because I'm interested in clowning practices, physical practices of that kind that you're
Yeah.
talking about, and I love to see that transparency in a person
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
their everyday self somehow is transformed. They are revealed in a different state or condition of the clown. You know, so we often think about taking on a character or taking on a persona or becoming something, or the training an actor requires to identify with a character. But and I don't know to what extent it happens in the vlogging realm.
Yeah.
But yes, with these previous disciplines, there was an attempt to achieve a kind of transparency, and that was achieved, I think, in some of that work by Grotowski and others. That say clowning might want to expose someone's stupidity in a loving way, to say, look, aren't we all just so naive and silly and so on, and positive and optimistic in spite of everything. And also maybe there is something that is counter to this democratic participatory notion in the vlog, where we're voyeuristically looking and hoping for moments of something that's revealing. Is it voyeuristic, do you think?
No, I don't think it is
that's
most of the
interesting.
time.
Yeah.
Because I think that I think some YouTube content is voyeuristic, but I think vlogging is not, because my kind of working definition, I suppose, of voyeurism is that you're looking at something that you don't have the license or permission.
Or you're not in that society
Yeah.
in some sense.
And you're also looking at somebody who doesn't realise they're being watched. There's something of that in voyeurism, I think, as well. Whereas for the vlogger, I think it's a very constructed space often, whereby they're inviting you into a private space, but it's on their terms.
Yes.
And they define those terms through the very way in which they communicate and what they show and what they don't show of that particular kind of space.
Yeah.
So if it's not voyeuristic, then it's certainly inviting us into a particular kind of private space in a very public way. And those intersections, I think, are always of interest, when that kind of very, very private public thing that I think is, for me, much more present in the contemporary world now, which is this focus on revealing yourself in various different kinds of ways through social media and posts and sharing and whatever it might be. Then I suppose vlogging is just part of that kind of tendency, maybe.
And Lavender talks about this interesting journey from notions of liveness, as they discussed in Auslander, who made a seminal discussion about the fact that theatre is always already mediated. And he was writing at a time when the predominant media was the TV or the video recording. And of course now it's mediated in all kinds of different ways. And through the vlog, perhaps not only are people looking at what's behind the scenes or revealing the construction of this world, which they carefully construct, but also step aside from to be kind of off camera occasionally, as was beautifully shown in the performance by one of your students, Josh. But they're also interrogating what is real and what is not real. And this is where Lavender takes this discussion about theatre performance, the embedding of performance in our interactions across these media and using these technologies. And so he traces this, and so I think, if I've understood it correctly, leads us towards the fact that we are still, as we used to perhaps when we're watching the theatre, asking ourselves what is real and what is not real, what is constructed and what is reliable and what is authentic. So this brings me now to your lovely Prezi, where Joe presents a very nice Prezi to the students and works through these terms a little bit. So shall we do that a little bit? Look at those.
Sure.
And maybe we can introduce for you some further, I say we, there's me, colonizing Joe's hard work in preparing this. Some other links and sort of lines of inquiry you might pursue for yourselves. Are you still with us? Okay. So we're just going to pop up with some words. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Well, the post-dramatic, we've already talked about postmodern, but post-dramatic is another line of inquiry, isn't it? Could you just encapsulate that a little bit?
Yeah, so this arises from a book that was written by a German theatre theorist called Hans Thies Lehmann. And it was written around about the end of the 20th century, beginning of the 21st, and then it got translated into English in 2006. And at that point, I think it had a really big effect on a lot of people who were studying performance, not necessarily as much practitioners who don't, I think, use the term as much as theorists do. But it became a current term, a term that had a lot of currency around sets of practices like Kurt was talking about, that have in some way moved beyond drama. So if we think about drama as the construction of a fictional universe on stage, you go and see a play, you understand where it is, that's very coherent. There are characters who you kind of recognise, who are constructed by the actors, they're three-dimensional, they have kind of dialogue, their action moves forwards, events happen, and basically you can understand all of that in the context of a dramatic world that's being created. And what Lehmann talks about is the kind of practices that we were discussing, the postmodern theatre that was about the 80s, 90s and noughties, where all of that seemed to be kind of ruptured or shifted in some way, so that practitioners that, like the Worcester Group, Forced Entertainment, Goat Island are good reference points if you want to look further at these, kind of started to think about ways in which theatre operated differently and moved beyond drama. So a lot of the kind of work that he's discussing and that people, I think, caught onto because it was very recognisable in a lot of the things that were on stage at that time, don't have recognisable characters, don't have a plot or a storyline, don't necessarily have linear action moving forward in time, but will often have sets of texts, movements, events,
tasks as activity. Yes, so the procedure of the narrative is not linear, as you said, but not even counterlinear, not even like a bricolage, an assemblage of scenes, but conducted through tasks that the performers need to and they're unpredictable, the outcome sometimes. Yes.
So he then kind of talked about these particular practices as being post-dramatic. So not that they had cut off completely from drama, but that they had ruptured what drama was and created new forms. And the book kind of goes through all different kind of elements that he considers to be present in his watching of that kind of work, and he picks up on things and he talks about text and body and media and space and voice, and says, well, in this new theatre, as he calls it, these have got different meanings and different effects and they manifest differently.
Yes, and he was arriving at a time, as you say, he offers a definition that people were quite hungry for and might be read alongside people who were talking about the audience and participation and spectatorship, and how not only the piece in itself might be reconsidered and reconfigured, but also how that is engaged with by others who have not made the work, well, not originated the work. I'm just scrolling through some lovely spheres here and moving towards a new word which is going to pop up in a second.
It is. Affect.
Here we are, affect. So, subtle word, affect, isn't it? Because it does accompany the word emotion. You might expect the actor, especially, to be a master of emotions. That there was that French Diderot who wrote about classical acting and the business of the actor who is embarrassed and blushes, for example, and how might they control that? Is it possible to practice and deliver that according to the demands of the drama? So he was already interrogating the real and the unreal in a theatrical sense. Here, affect moves on from emotion, doesn't it? It becomes a much broader quality associated with the experience, doesn't it? How are you using this when you address your students with
So
this
when I'm
term?
talking to my students about affect, I say I'm kind of trying to explain why I think it's an important term. And I think it is an important term because of some of the things that we were discussing earlier to do with how theatre is now got a set of practices which seem to try to want us to feel things. It's trying to kind of arrange, Lavender calls it mise en sensibilité, which is the arrangement of feelings as opposed to mise en scène, which is the arrangement of the kind of stage or the scene or the environment and the things in it. And I think what's interesting about that is that it kind of it encompasses a set of kind of broad practices that are to do with trying to immerse an audience into a world, make them feel like they are part of something, give them some agency so that they feel like they're acting and making choices which affect the performance in some way.
So you might think of companies like Punch Drunk, or Look Left, Look Right, Dream Think Speak, is that? And Shunt, maybe, Collective. Many companies, in fact, now working in this way, creating this kind of affective environment, affective experience. Yes.
And I suppose the link to affect is that as opposed to emotion that, as you were describing, has been very much associated with a lot of actor training, particularly in terms of the idea of controlling or bringing forth and a very particular emotion for the purpose of the character that you're playing so that that can be felt and understood by the audience. This is a much more amorphous sense, I think, of something that you feel when you encounter something, when an event happens, that is kind of pre-rational. So you're not making sense of it, you're just kind of experiencing it first through the body and the senses, and then possibly making some sense of that or cognitively processing it after the fact.
Yes. It has a sort of, maybe it's linked to an inclination in performance research to think of the experience through the lens of phenomenology, to think of that experience, the viscerality of the engagement with the live performer, or as you say, those sort of affective tinglings and embodied sensations that arise from the performance that may not be intended by the performer, but maybe just attendant on the performance.
Yeah, and I think that that's really interesting in the sense that when you read affect through a philosopher like Gilles Deleuze, he calls affect the non-human becomings of man. And I think that what's interesting about that is that in a sense of a space and engagement and experience, that affect doesn't just sit within us. It's kind of flows, movements, intensities that we might feel collectively, that might be embodied through particular kinds of spaces and objects and movements and sounds. It isn't just something that you have a kind of subjective experience of as an individual.
And it draws attention to the very particularity of the performance event, doesn't it? And that moment, you know, the strange things that happen. The usher who comes in when they're not supposed to come in, the audience member who does not respond to the prop that somehow is set there for them to observe. Maybe they pick it up and play with it.
Yeah, and that moment where you go, ooh!
Whoops, yes. All these things that are wrong are suddenly, well, not suddenly, but they are there and they are available to your affective, to your experience and how you might discuss your experience after the event.
And I think that kind of sits in a broad and very kind of, it's not a recent thing, but as Kurt was saying, that a lot of performance theorists have moved from thinking primarily about semiotics and reading performances as something that you can see somehow separate to the self, that you can look at colour and shape and kind of connotations.
Yes,
and denotations and things
signs
like
and signposts and pointing you to the message. It used to really infuriate me when people would say, "What's the message you want your audience to get? What do you want to get them to take away from it?" I don't know. I don't know. And actually, what all you are saying is very sympathetic with a traditional actor training where the actor learns to listen and respond. And the emotion arises not from them trying to control their